Hello, my name is Candy and I'm here to tell you the best books that I read in 2015. So number 10 is The Enchanted by Renee Denfeld. Now this book follows a death row investigator, the priest who is in love with her, and the narrator who is a death row inmate. It's never entirely disclosed what he did, but that again makes it more powerful because it's left to the horrors of your imagination, which is limitless. It's essentially about trying to find humanity in the most darkest and direst of situations. The narrator doesn't pull any punches about the types of people who are on death row and what has caused them to become and do the people and the things that they have become and done. And it's so hard-hitting. But what makes this book even more beautiful is that it's infused with magical realism, which kind of heightens the idea that you have to find humanity and beauty in the most darkest and direst situations in order for most people to actually survive. It's really beautifully written. Renee Denfeld is actually a death row investigator, so it kind of heightens how realistic this book feels and how hard-hitting those kind of situations are, because nothing, again, feels gratuitous. I can't even begin to explain to you how much it kind of makes me think, makes me grateful, but makes me incredibly sad and empathetic. And I think essentially it's a book about empathy. So yeah, that's The Enchanted by Renee Denfeld. Go read it! Number 9 is Asking for It by Louise O'Neill. This book is so good. Louise O'Neill is a rising superstar author and I can't wait to see what she does next. This book follows Emma, who is beautiful, somewhat manipulative, somewhat cruel 18-year-old who lives in small town Ireland. She's very much at the top of her social ladder, and she kind of gains esteem and a sense of self and self-worth from that. The story goes is that she goes to a party one night, she wakes up the next morning not remembering anything about what happened the night before until pictures start surfacing online that show in very graphic detail what happened to Emma that night. I could talk for hours about this book and I've written about it and I'll leave the link in the down bar below. What this book explores is what happens when you grow up in a culture where the onus is on you as a victim, you as a woman, to not be violated. It's what happens when this young girl kind of really buys into that narrative. There's a complete immersion in this narrative and there's no respite from her believing that, or at least there's very little. It talks about rape culture and consent. This book is really, really important and I think a lot of people love it and relate to it and I really, really recommend it. And Louise O'Neill, whatever she does next, I will definitely be here for it. The next book I want to talk about is The Queen of the Tearling by Erica Johansson. Now this book, I enjoyed it a ton more than I thought I would. This book is a fantasy story about a girl who needs to ascend a throne when she comes of age, which in this world is 19. But that ascension to her throne and the kind of maintenance of her throne is incredibly difficult because there are people from all sides who want to kill her. What I really loved about this book was the world building, it was the characters, just the really intricate and political infused plot. Everything was done incredibly well. It had some really beautiful writing. There was a passage about addiction in there that I just really, really loved and I shared with anyone who would listen to me basically. But yeah, it was, I think, just everything that she said about kind of the heroine being plain and what it meant to be a leader and what it meant to kind of make those tough decisions and be someone who is worthy of ascending that throne and be worthy of leading a country and what that meant. I just really, really thought it was such a good book, and I think that, you know, because of all the hype that surrounded it when it came out, and not being someone who kind of normally gravitates towards fantasy, I didn't really think that it was going to be my cup of tea, but I ended up really, really enjoying it. The next book I also don't have with me because I'm so organised is Sane in a New World by Ruby Wax. This book follows Ruby Wax, who suffered from depression. I loved it because I love books that kind of bring together horror and humour, and essentially Ruby Wax just does just that. She brings in a lot about neuroscience and how the lifestyle that we have affects our brains and how our brains have adapted over time, through evolution and things like that. But again, it's just a really funny, really heartbreaking memoir about how essentially she copes. Because she writes so humorously, it's this incredibly like human and relatable touch. Even if you haven't experienced things to maybe the extreme that she has, I think a lot of people will gain a lot from this book, because she talks about just general anxiety and how to deal with stressful situations and being the type of person who wants to please everyone. Also, you know, just being the type of person who wants attention and how human that is. I really enjoyed it. I think it's so good. I can see why it got so much praise when it came out, and I think that a lot of people will also enjoy it. Number 7 is Dumplin by Julie Murphy, which I think is such a delightful book. This book follows Willow Dean, who is a plus size or fat girl. She uses it as a body descriptor and doesn't see fat as a pejorative term, as she kind of is living her life, is like dealing with school, and she gets involved with a boy who is good looking, and as a result of that she starts feeling much more insecure and much more self-conscious about herself. She enters a pageant, things ensue. Having a character like this that presented without shame but presented realistically is so powerful. I think it's really wonderful. It evokes a real strong sense of place. You know, it's set in Texas and it has that kind of Friday Night Lights feel to it, but also it reminded me of My Mad Fat Diary, which is one of my favourite shows of all time. I think it's a really sweet, wonderful book, and I just wish that it had been around when I was younger. The next book, if you are going to read any book on my top 10 list, read this one. It's called Citizen by Claudia Rinkle. Basically, Citizen is a series of vignettes, poems, very short stories about race and racial discrimination. The thing that this book really gets right is that it doesn't deal with the kind of discrimination that is incredibly explicit, that everyone recognises. You know, the type where someone's calling a name at you from across the road or someone's yelling racial slurs at you. It's actually the kind of discrimination that people don't realise they're enacting themselves, and it's really powerful. It's the kind of discrimination that you kind of deal with on a day-to-day basis, and it's the kind of discrimination that kind of chips away at, I think, someone's sense of self-worth and someone's sense of motivation. Reading Citizen was just like breathing some fresh air, because you get this sense of like elevation, and you get the sense of, oh, I'm not crazy, other people experience and deal and feel this too. The next book on this list is one that's probably quite popular, you may have heard of it. It's called Everything Everything by Nicola Yoon. Everything Everything follows a girl who has a disease that doesn't enable her to go outside, basically. Her and her mum and her nurse have created this kind of really functional, friendly world for her. I think even though she obviously has the frustration of not being able to go outside, she's happy and she's content until a boy across the street moves in, and then things kind of escalate from there. I am a really unabashed fan of romance, especially when it's done right. When kind of relationships and romance in contemporary novels are done right, it's one of the most, I think, gratifying things to read, because it's so swoony and sweet. What I think this book gets right is that element, and that it being one of my favourite elements in stories. I loved this book. Nicola Yoon did a really good job of kind of delving into kind of uncertainty of first love, but it's kind of heightened by this sense of foreboding, because you know that something bad is going to happen. It's told really uniquely as well, because there are drawings and little illustrations that the main character Maddie uses to kind of express what she feels and express what she thinks, and she does it in this kind of like weirdly unique way that is, even though it's unique and kind of quirky, it's instantly kind of recognisable and relatable, and you're like, oh great, that's exactly how I feel. It's really delightful, and I think a lot of people will love it. Speaking of delightful things, another book on this list is Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. This book follows Simon, who is in a relationship, email flirtationship, with a boy called Blue, who goes to the same school as him, but he doesn't know the identity of Blue. This book, I think, just is so sweet. It follows the kind of development of the relationship Simon has with Blue, and his coming to terms of coming out to people and how he actually deals with that being a strange thing that he has to do. Also dabbles in the idea of there being like a default sexuality, a default race, and how that kind of plays into the way that he has to handle himself, but also how he kind of buys into those defaults and those ideas. At the core, it's a really wonderful love story, and it's a really sweet exploration of friendship and how, especially when you're growing up, how different type of friendships come into play into your life. It's a real celebration of courage, of having courage in love, and I really liked it. Speaking of more delightful things, the next book on the list is It's Not You, It's Me by Vari McFarlane. This book is so great. It follows a girl who is in a 10-year-long relationship with her boyfriend. She's very happy with her relationship, not so happy with her job, but she's kind of just going about life, she's dealing. Then she finds out that her boyfriend has been cheating on her, and she is completely knocked for six by that, very understandably, and she moves out. She moves to London from Newcastle. She gets a job, kind of tackles her new life, trying to come to terms with being alone and not being in a relationship, and moving to London and getting a new job. What I really loved about this was that it was an incredibly real portrayal of what it means to be broken up with someone. There's this passage in the book where she's debating whether she's going to eventually go back to her long-term boyfriend, who's incredibly sorry for what he did. Her friend says to her, look, I think personally you're going to go back. I don't think that you'll really split up. I just think that you're punishing him at the moment and trying to kind of make him come to terms with what he did before you go back. It's just got a lot of moments like that with real emotional honesty and real uncertainty about her decisions. But at the same time, it's really incredibly romantic because other things happened and new people come into her life. Like, the end is like, oh my god, I was swooning. But I think, you know, just the idea of like trying to reinvent yourself or trying to just be after you spent a decade, or a really like quite important defining decade, not that every decade isn't important, but you know, your late teens and your 20s in a relationship that you're very comfortable with. Vari McFarlane does a real good job of showing how debilitating that change can be. I thought when I started reading this book, I thought I knew what the story was going to be. Cheating boyfriend, moving to London, blah blah blah, and it's so much deeper than that. The writing really elevates it. The main character is also a comic book artist. She delves into that side of herself, and when she's kind of trying to express her pain and her grief, and also her resolution to try and live and be independent. They're really cool illustrations, and I think that for that reason and for so many other reasons it will appeal to so many different types of people. I really liked it. I think again it's done so well and it's really delightful. And the last book I want to talk about is A Song for Izzy Bradley by Caris Bray. And this book follows the Bradleys, who are a Mormon family who lose their youngest child in very tragic circumstances. And it's about them trying to deal with their grief in a very personal way and how they try and deal with their grief as a family. It's this idea that everyone has a personal way of grieving. You have all the siblings who are in their teens and younger, and you also have the mother and the father, and how they try and look to their Mormon faith for healing, and how sometimes that works for them and sometimes it really doesn't. It's a really delicate and steadfast look at faith and religion and family and grief, and how those things kind of entwine together to make this really difficult situation even more tricky to figure out. It's really wonderful. Anyway everyone, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have had a wonderful holiday period, and I'll see you in the next video. It's good to be back. See you later.
If you love me too, what a wonderful world this would be.